I'm sitting here at the piano this morning on the 4th of July in 2015 and wanted to send out a message to everybody, hoping you'll have a great 4th of July and recognize the significance of what this day means. And as you know, my name is Phil Norris. I am running for Congress in the Alabama's 4th Congressional District. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about the significance of the Declaration of Independence, which is what we're celebrating today. Give you a little background on some of the people that had input into the Declaration of Independence and what it means throughout the whole history of the human experience, what the significance of the Declaration of Independence was. Let's talk a little bit about Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was a very astute student. He grew up in colonial Virginia, and he had studied several languages by the age of 9. I think he knew Greek, Latin, and some of the other foreign languages. And probably by the time he was 15 or 16, he had mastered 5 foreign languages. And he entered the College of William and Mary at age 16, very astute student. And by the time he was 19, he had graduated. And he had gone on to study law under Professor George Wythe, or George Wythe, depending on how you pronounce that. And he became so astute at the law, he studied for 5 years, and when he went to take the bar exam, it was reported by many that he really knew more than the people that were giving him the bar exam. So Thomas Jefferson also, after he was in the law program, or during that time, he started reading a lot about ancient history, about ancient Roman and Greek history, and all the Greek and Roman classics. He read things like from authors like Aristotle and Plato, Plato's Politicus, Plato's Republic, and Plato's Statesman. And these ideas helped him form ideas about what our government should look like. Also, in studying ancient Israel, he studied the fact that they had these, at times, what he would call a very constitutional republic form of government. And when they had a type of government like that, he seemed to note that they were flourished as a people, the ancient Israelites. And it goes on in his studies, he found out that the Anglo-Saxons also had developed some of these same ancient principles, as he calls them, that the Israelites had developed back in the day. And they had this type of government up until about the 8th century. And so all these things kind of go into helping Jefferson formulate his ideas on what our government should look like. And by the time they got to the informal Committee of the Whole, as they say, on June 7th in 1776, there was a guy there by the name of Richard Henry Lee from Virginia, and he decided, ladies and gentlemen, it's now time, actually I guess it was all gentlemen back then, he said, it's now time for us to separate wholly from Great Britain. And this began the thought process of kind of tying it all together to try to get people thinking about, hey, we're tired of all the things that King George III has done against us as a people. And so it came upon Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were kind of looked upon at that time to author some document that would tie all this together and would be some sort of decree that would put it on paper, and people would commit to it that they're going to separate from Great Britain. And so there was a discussion between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson regarding who was going to write this document. They were both well-known writers. They had pretty much the same background as far as their readings were concerned. They had studied Aristotle and Plato, and writers like Algernon Sidney, and a guy named Jonathan Locke, who was actually beheaded for his conservative ideas in Great Britain. And so these two gentlemen were looked upon as the people to put it all together and put it on paper. And so there was a discussion between Adams and Jefferson said to Adams, you should write it. And Adams said, no, you should write it. And they kept going back and forth. And finally, Adams made the point. He said, number one, he said, I am obnoxious and I am unpopular, and you are just the opposite of that. And you're a Virginian, and the person who writes this declaration should be from Virginia. And so he also said that, hey, you're a 10 times better writer than me. This was Adams speaking to Jefferson. So Jefferson took on the task. He said, I will be glad to. It's settled then. I'll be glad to do that. Now, Jefferson took 17 days to write the Declaration of Independence, which wasn't called that at the time. That's kind of the title that came later. But he wrote about all the charges against King George III and all the things that he had done to squelch their freedom and their independence and their human liberty and all that. He wrote about those in the main body of the Declaration of Independence. And he got a lot of this stuff. He had already helped write the Virginia Constitution, and he had also written a work called The Summary View of the Rights of British America. And all these ideas were contained in those two documents. And so he just kind of talked about that. And then he got into the ancient principles that he had talked about, that we talked about earlier, about when the nation of Israel had these ancient principles of representative government, and also the Anglo-Saxons, which had that form of government, which lasted until about the 8th century. And so Jefferson decided, I want to write about these ancient principles. I've written about the charges against King George III. I want to write about these ancient principles that seem to have an impact on every society that they had been used in a good way, in a very positive way, and it furthered the quest of human freedom in the societies that these ancient principles had been practiced. And so he sat down and he started writing, and he wanted to make sure that those ancient principles were in the first two paragraphs of the Declaration of Independence. So he decided, I'm going to spend the time trying to figure out how to make sure those are all in the first two paragraphs of the Declaration of Independence. And I have with me right now, I can't remember all this stuff, so actually I have a textbook with me. It's called The Making of America. It's the substance and meaning of the Constitution. This book was published by the National Center for Constitutional Studies. And I wanted to read to you those eight ancient principles that Thomas Jefferson was talking about. And he said, first off, sound government should be based on self-evident truths. These truths should be so obvious, so rational, and so morally sound that their authenticity is beyond reasonable dispute. Okay, that's number one. Number two, the equal station of mankind here on earth is a cosmic reality, an obvious and inherent aspect of the law of nature and of nature's God. The law of nature and nature's God is written in the Declaration of Independence. And it's one of the themes that the American, what we would call the American mindset of the period that I talked about in an earlier video, the American mindset was all about the pursuit of liberty, human freedom, the property rights, and all the things that we talked about in those inalienable rights that were talked about in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. The third ancient principle, he said, this presupposes as a self-evident truth that the Creator made human beings equal in their rights, equal before the bar of justice, and equal in His sight. Of course, individual attributes and personal circumstances in life vary widely. We know that. We see people different from us every day. We all have the same equal rights. And number four, these rights which have been bestowed by the Creator on each individual are unalienable. That is, they cannot be taken away or violated without the offender coming under the judgment and wrath of the Creator. Note, he said the Creator, not the government, the Creator. He's the one that gave us these rights. A person may have other rights, such as those which have been created as vested right by statute, but vested rights are not unalienable. They can be altered or eliminated at any time. The fifth concept or ancient principle that Jefferson built into the Declaration of Independence was among the most important of the unalienable rights are the right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to pursue whatever course in your life a person may desire in search of happiness, so long as it does not invade the inherent rights of others. We need to look at this right now because we're being challenged on several different avenues of our society on our rights versus other person's rights. Okay, the thing to note is it does not invade the inherent rights of others. That's a key point. Number six of these ancient principles that Jefferson was talking about. The number six, the most basic reason for a community or nation to set up a system of government is to assure its inhabitants that the rights of the people shall be protected and preserved. And because this is so, it follows that no office or agency of government has any right to exist except with the consent of the people of their representatives. And that's concept number 7. Okay, so the government exists because of us, because of our consent. And they derive their powers from the consent of the governed. Number 8, this is the last one of the ancient principles. It also follows that if a government, either by malfeasance or neglect, fails to protect those rights, talking about our rights as citizens, or even worse, if the government itself begins to violate those rights, then it is the right and duty of the people to regain control of their affairs and set up a form of government which will serve the people better. I talked about this in an earlier video where I talked about those original and legitimate principles that Jefferson talked about in another time. Those are the things that we have to protect. We have to regain control of our government and get us back to those original and legitimate principles. It's a right and a duty, as Jefferson put it into the Declaration of Independence. Now, he got all this stuff written down, and on July 2nd in 1776, he brought it before the Committee of a Whole. It was an informal committee, and they started debating these ideas that Jefferson had written down, and they made an all total 60 changes to the original draft of the Declaration of Independence. The key thing to note is the 8 principles that I just read, none of those were touched. They all agreed upon those. And it was signed and ratified on July 4th, 1776. There was some debate about the actual document that we see in the archives in Washington. That document was a printer document, which was actually printed probably in August of 1776. But the original day that they signed it was July 4th, 1776. And let me tell you that the last part of the Declaration of Independence, tells you about their commitment to this American experiment, the American way of life, and the American government, and the fact that they wanted to separate from Great Britain. They wanted to create a government based on these ancient principles and the unalienable rights that Jefferson talked about. So here's what their commitment was. And think about this today. When we look at our government, are we committed to our country and our government like they were? Let me read this. They said, the final sentence of the Declaration of Independence, wherein the delegates stated, and I'm quoting now, and for the support of this declaration with the firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. This is what they vowed to each other. They put it in writing. It was like signing away their life because they were committed to the Constitution, to this form of government, because they knew this was a government that God wanted for his people. Now, what would have been their penalty had they been caught and had they not won the Revolutionary War? They would have all been killed. Now, let me tell you a little bit about what that would have looked like. Back in the day, they would have been hanged until they were unconscious, and they would have been cut down and then revived and brought back to life, and then they would have been disemboweled and beheaded, and their bodies would have been quartered, cut up, and they would have been boiled, and they would have scattered their body parts all over the earth. So there would be no record of their existence and nothing to have to look at in a grave or go to pay respect to. It would be scattered. It's like they were eradicated from any memory of being on the face of the earth. That's what they were up against. It's kind of interesting, too. My first submarine was the USS Thomas Jefferson. And one of our things, or the slogan that we had on our submarine was hostility against tyranny. And I think that's what Jefferson writes about. He writes about when we have a tyrannical government back in the time, they got to bring hostility against that to squelch the tyranny. Ladies and gentlemen, happy 4th of July. I hope this has been a lesson in how our Declaration was formed and the mindset that they had at the time and the readings that they went into formulating the ideas of the Declaration in this great country that we have today. I would hope that we would all be committed, like they were back in the days of the founders, to supporting this country. And some of us, those in the military and other factions of our country, have put their lives on the line supporting the Constitution and defending the Constitution. And I would hope that you would reflect upon this day and the significance of our freedom and what it's going to take for us to maintain that freedom going forward. I hope you commit yourself to doing that. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.